Welcome to Nourish with Kristin, your weekly chat with certified nutrition therapist and lifelong foodie Kristin Whitaker, coming to you from Utah Natural Wellness with a reminder that your food should serve you. So, let's dish! Hi, welcome to Utah Natural Wellness. I'm Kristin Whitaker, your certified nutrition therapist, and I love talking all things food and how it affects us. I work for Utah Natural Meat and happy to have them as a sponsor and excited to chat with you today. So our last episode, we did a little myth busting, busted up some common weight loss myths. The goal here is to try to empower you to take your health in your hands and design your own weight loss journey if that's part of it. And I've had people ask why I do these videos and I'm giving away so much information for free. Well, I'm the kind of person who likes to dive deep and learn. I like to know what's under the hood and the nuts and bolts of everything and how it works. And I like to study. So what I'm sharing as I've been through nutrition therapy school and in my own experiences and deep dives, I've come up with a lot of information that I think we should all know because we're talking about our bodies, right? They didn't come with a user manual, but I'm convinced they should have. There's so much that would save us so much pain and suffering, and if we know better. Knowledge really is power when we're talking about our bodies. And so that's why I'm doing these videos. I thoroughly believe that you have it in you to live the life that you want, to have the body you want, to fuel that journey. You just need some information. So we busted some diet myths that are holding you back last week, and this time around we're talking about some of the hormones that are key players in weight loss. There's a lot of information here. I'll probably be referring to my notes more than I usually do, so excuse me in advance. Just so you know, all of this information, including supplements I recommend or life strategies to balance hormones, this will all be on my blog when I repost this, so don't get overwhelmed. Let's start in with hormones. What is a hormone? We hear that word a lot, and it's really just a chemical messenger in our body. There's about 50 of them, but if you count hormone-like substances that act like hormones in our body, there's more than 200 of them. And they're really complicated because most of them do more than one thing and affect more than one other hormone. That's why when I made the cover for this video, I have that tangled up picture, because hormones are really an entangled structure that they're hard to understand. So we're going to talk about some of the main players today, but certainly not all of them that affect weight loss. But the good news is that they're all balanced by pretty much the same actions. There are powerful, simple steps you can take to balance your hormones, to make them work harmoniously and untangle some of that mess. So don't get overwhelmed. Just listen as we're talking for symptoms that sound like you, that might resonate with a condition you have, that might trigger an action for you to take, and listen for steps that you can take to improve your overall health, including balancing hormones. So that's what we're going for. So hormones are made by our endocrine system, and they're, like I said, they're chemical messengers that circulate throughout our body, and they contain the instructions for a specific action and also a key or a protein that will act on a receptor to unlock the process, to kick it off, if that makes sense. So they determine everything from reproduction to metabolism to our mood to the way that we grow to the way we carry fat. Really, pretty much everything that our body can do is affected by a hormone that triggered that action. So hormones are super important. The ones we're going to be talking about today are leptin, ghrelin, cortisol, HCl and LPL, insulin, and we're going to touch on estrogen. That's a lot of hormones, right? So let's dive in, and part of the design of this is to alleviate some of the guilt you have if you're carrying around extra weight and you just can't get it off, and you've tried diet after diet and they're failing, and we get into this guilt complex where we think it's our fault, but really if your hormones aren't balanced, it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do to convince your body to let go of that weight sustainably or in the long term. It might drop some fast, but you'll pick it back up, and it usually brings some friends with it. It's such a cruel trap, and it's one of the harshest that I've seen women deal with. So we're going to jump in today and figure out what we can do about that. Okay, let's start with leptin. Leptin is called the satiety hormone. Leptin is made in our fat cells and it reduces our appetite. So it makes us feel full. Leptin is what tells you you've had enough, you can stop now. So since it's made in our fat cells, you would think that as we put on extra fat and we become bigger, hey, we'd have more leptin, we'd be satiated, right? It doesn't quite work that way. Actually, it's similar to insulin resistance, if you're familiar with that term. If we have too much leptin coming out of too many fat cells, we build a resistance to it, which means we stop listening to it. Our body stops responding to it. And suddenly that signal that tells us we're full either doesn't exist or it's so weak it's easy to override, and we find ourselves overeating. So it's kind of a sad trap to be in, because the more that you eat, the less that signal is effective, so the more you're going to eat. So one study showed that obese people have 4 times as much leptin in their bodies as someone at their optimal weight. And that just demonstrates the tragedy of leptin resistance. So the brain, even though you have leptin signals coming at you, the brain's not reading it, so it thinks that you're starving, and it pummels you with hunger signals. And so you're eating, but you're still hungry. And to add insult to injury, that extra food that you're eating that you didn't need is going to go straight to your fat storage. And that's one of the traps that we can get into, where we're perpetuating this cycle, where we're eating more, which only makes us want more, which only makes us store more, and it can get out of control. So another cruel thing about leptin. Hormones, when they work, are so beautiful. When they do their jobs, they're wonderful, but when they're off, it can be a cruel game. One of the cruel things about leptin is if we lose weight suddenly, you'd think that might help with this leptin resistance, but in the short term, it creates an urgency, and your body will pump out more leptin, more hunger signals, more crying out for food, because it thinks that you're starving, and whatever weight you lost, it wants it back, because that's its security, that's its reserves, that's what's going to get you through the famine, right? And so losing weight will cause a temporary spike in leptin too. And that's why a lot of us are successful at getting that first 10 pounds off, but then we just can't stave off the cravings. We just can't stop putting it in our mouth, and it comes right back. And like I said, when weight comes back, it brings friends with it. It's really cruel. So this is what leptin resistance, leptin abundance, and off-balance leptin can do to us. It makes us overeat. So there is a way to balance leptin, to chill it out so we get just the right amount. One of those is to avoid inflammatory foods. And that would especially be like sugary foods and drinks and trans fats and processed foods. And we eat more anti-inflammatory foods like fatty fish, like grass-fed meats, like green vegetables. We get exercise and getting enough sleep. And pay attention to these, because you're going to see these repeated as we talk about hormones, because it really is the same methods that are going to work across the board. One specific to leptin is supplementing with alpha lipoic acid, I hope that said it right, and with fish oil. That can help resensitize you to leptin sensitivity. So if you're a hungry girl and you're always hungry and nothing is stopping it, it could be leptin you have to thank for that one. So a lot of hormones come in pairs where they work in opposition to each other or with each other, and leptin's partner in crime is ghrelin. Ghrelin. It's a weird word. It's easy to remember though, because ghrelin, imagine your tummy growling, which always happens at the most embarrassing times, right? Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. Ghrelin is the hormone that's triggered when our stomach's empty. It tells our hypothalamus to pump out ghrelin to tell our brain, hey, we're hungry, we need to put something in here now. So ghrelin levels are lowest right before we eat, and then ghrelin is highest right before we eat, and then it decreases slowly, and it's lowest about an hour after we eat. And that's why we get these delayed hunger responses where we're starving, and if we eat too fast, we're going to overeat before our body can tell us, hey, we're not starving anymore, okay? Ghrelin is the reason you hear tips like, put the fork down between bites, or wait 20 minutes before seconds, or have a conversation while you're eating to stretch out the time so you'll be satiated, because ghrelin's coming at you and telling you're hungry, and it needs time to shut off. So in overweight people, again, studies have shown that after a meal, ghrelin only decreases slightly, so the hypothalamus, that gland in your brain, will only receive a weak signal to stop eating, and then overeating occurs easily. So it's another cruel thing about the more we struggle with our weight, the more the struggle is, if that makes sense. Which is why you can't, as a healthy person that's at your optimal weight, that's thinner, and look at someone struggling with weight and just say it's willpower, they're stupid, they're weak, they can't do that. It's not a judgment call you can make unless you've been there and you've experienced it, because you have a lot of hormonal imbalances and disadvantages and biology working against you. So it can be a real struggle if you're not taking the right steps, which we're trying to help you with right now. But I want to emphasize that it's just cruel to judge people in a journey that's different than yours, because you don't know what their body is dealing with and trying to balance. And ghrelin is one of those things. If your ghrelin is not balanced, you will be hungry and you won't know you've eaten enough, so you'll just keep packing it down. Ways to balance ghrelin. One of the biggest things that can throw this signal off is high fructose corn syrup. It's such a concentrated energy source. For the volume you're taking in, your body doesn't have time to register, hey, I just drank 2,000 calories, I need to stop. Okay, so cutting back on processed foods, sweets, sugars, sodas, please cut back on the soda. They really mess with your ghrelin signals. And then anything that's calorically dense that you're pounding, especially if it's full of chemicals. Another thing you can do is to eat protein with every meal, especially with breakfast or your first meal of the day. That will be satiating. It's slow digesting. It's slower to eat. You really can't. And same with fiber too. Fibrous foods that take longer to eat and longer to chew. That will give your hypothalamus time to signal, hey, let up on the ghrelin. We're not hungry anymore. So those are some tips there. Next we have cortisol. This is a big one. When I say the word cortisol, any of you on here or watching later should think stress. In fact, just saying it makes me stress out a little bit. Cortisol is the stress hormone. It's what triggers fight and flight in us. It's what gets us ready to defend ourselves. And this is awesome in the case, in primal times when we had predators to evade and tragedies to avoid, but in modern time, we have chronically elevated stress, which leads to chronic elevation of cortisol. It's the laundry that didn't get done, the carpool that needs to get run, the finances that aren't balancing. It's the looming deadlines at work. It's the stress in a relationship. Whatever it is, it's not a threat to our survival, but our body doesn't know that. It just knows that we're feeling tense and stressed and urgent, and it's pumping out cortisol to help us be ready to fight or flee from that T-Rex. So I don't know very many people that don't have chronically elevated cortisol, and this could be the number one thing that is packing weight on for you. It's produced in our adrenal glands, and it's correlated with stored weight around the middle area in women. So if you're one of those that's like, I can't get rid of this, everything here it won't budge no matter what I do, you need to look at your lifestyle and your stress levels and how well you're sleeping, because that is evident of cortisol. So another funny thing about cortisol is it can cause weight loss or weight gain. So there was a time when I was a young adult, I was in college on my own, and I encountered a really stressful event. Getting stressed thinking about it. And it was really hard for me to go through. And I called home and I told my mom, you know how sometimes you put clothes in the dryer and they shrink? And she's like, yeah, duh. I said, well, the weirdest thing happened. I did my laundry and I put my clothes in the dryer and they all got bigger. She's like, what? I'm all, no, seriously, my pants won't stay on, my shirts are loose. And she just laughed at me. She's like, go step on the scale, which I never did because I was I miss the days before kids. I was always underweight and always thin, and I didn't have weight to lose, so it didn't occur to me to step on the scale. But this event had triggered a cortisol response in me, and I dropped 15 pounds in a couple of weeks. So yeah, the dryer does not make your clothes bigger, but stress in some cases can make your clothes fall off. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, after I had kids, my stress response switched on its head, and now when I'm stressed out, weight won't budge, which is sad because once you have kids, you are chronically stressed. You just are. It's synonymous. Kids equal stress. So I completely lost my ability to lose weight. I wasn't naturally slender anymore, and I believe cortisol was to blame for that. So the difference between whether cortisol triggers weight to stay on versus weight to come off is the presence of insulin. Remember I told you how hormones, usually there's opposing hormones and hormones that work together, and they all affect the actions of others. Cortisol and insulin play together. So in the absence of insulin, cortisol triggers what's called, so when there's no insulin in the body, cortisol triggers what's called hormone-sensitive lipase, or HSL. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. But it basically releases fat from your cells to use immediately. So it says, oh my gosh, we need to run from this tiger, we need energy right now, and it releases fat and it tells you to get out of there and run. So, but if we have insulin in our system while cortisol is there, then cortisol triggers LPL, which is lipoprotein lipase, to increase fat storage, to pack it away. And this also contributes to insulin resistance, which we're going to talk about later. So insulin in the body, and we get cortisol triggers us to lock fat down and store it tight. And it makes it almost impossible to lose weight. Another note about cortisol, and put in questions if I'm not making sense or you need clarity. And remember, this gets confusing, but it will all be on the blog with explanations and stuff, so this will be easier. Another note about cortisol is we can get sensitivity to that from chronic elevation. It's called adrenal fatigue, or HPA dysfunction, and it just means that when we have it in our body all the time, we're not able to regulate our response to it anymore, and we overproduce it, and this will continue to trigger us to lock down that weight, or I shouldn't say some lucky few to drop it weight, because that's a real struggle too, but most of us seem to struggle with cortisol locking the weight on. Another note about cortisol is you cannot lose weight if you aren't sleeping. If you're not sleeping consistently, and if you're not getting good, deep, restorative sleep, your cortisol will always be elevated while it's reading you as existing in the state of emergency. You're so stressed out, your body can't even find time to sleep. You're not going to be able to lose weight sustainably and safely in a healthy way. So if you're stressed out about losing weight, that's another cruel trick. You're contributing to cortisol. You need to find ways to meditate, to calm down, to slow down, and you need to work on your sleep. You need to score those 8 hours consistently, and then your body will be able to relax and exhale and release this fat that it's been holding on to protect you. You can also balance cortisol by eating clean foods, a balanced diet of clean, real foods. You don't want to go too low in calories. This is another thing that we do to ourselves. We calorie restrict, thinking we'll lose weight faster, but that causes a stress response. Our body thinks we're being starved, we're going to die, and it shoots up the cortisol levels and locks down the fat stores. So don't do that. And then work on meditation. Work it into your day. I have a hard time finding long times or stretches to meditate, and I have a hard time clearing my mind, but I can do what I call purposeful pauses in a day. You're brushing your teeth and you put it down for a minute and breathe. Or you're doing the dishes and you just stop for a minute and take 3 breaths, that's all. Or you're driving the car and you sit in it for a second before you get out. Just little micro sessions can do wonders for your cortisol levels and bringing them down. And then when it comes to your weight, focus on acceptance. Tell yourself you're okay now. Take away that urgency to lose by accepting how you are. Not accepting that you can't change, but loving yourself in the state that you are. And these will help you counter the cortisol triggers that are locking down that weight loss. So, all right, moving on to, we mentioned HSL and LPL. That's hormone-sensitive lipase and lipoprotein lipase. These work in opposition of each other. And they'll determine, we have this fat that we're eating in our diet, and it will determine if we're going to store it or use it. Or the fat stores we already have in our body. Are we going to release them already and get them moving, or are we going to hold on to them tight? So I like to use an apple, I should have brought one, to demonstrate this. So if I give you an apple and I ask you, hey, will you make me applesauce? You probably won't if I just gave you one apple, right? Why would you go to all that trouble to store it for later when you can obviously eat that and use that right now? But if I gave you a case of apples and said, hey, will you make me some applesauce? You're like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's put some of that away for later. Let's stack it on the shelves. Let's go through the work to convert it to a storage form, put a lid on it, stick it on the shelf. Can you get where I'm going with this? Okay, so HSL, hormone-sensitive lipase, is located in our fat cells, and it makes them leaner. Our fat cells, it will make them shrink by triggering us to break down triglycerides or stored fats. It's triggering us to eat that apple, to use it for energy rather than store it away. If we've already stored it, it's triggering us to open up that can of applesauce and take it down. Okay, insulin, which we're going to talk about next, suppresses HCl to keep fat stored away. If there is insulin present, you're not going to be able to open that can and use it. You're just going to keep stacking. It suppresses HSL. Lipoprotein lipase, or LPL, is it takes fat from the bloodstream and it packs it into fat cells. So it's taking those apples and shoving it into jars and putting it away for later. And so it makes these fat cells larger. It makes our food storage bigger, okay? So HSL is the apple that we're going to eat right away, and lipoprotein is the applesauce that we're going to store for later. So this leaves less energy. See, remember, it's taking it out of our bloodstream and packing it away. This leaves less energy circulating in our blood cells, our bloodstream, for other cells to use. So they're going to signal that we need more food. If all the fat we're eating is getting signaled for storage, our body's going to say, hey, wait, I didn't get an apple. I need some more. And it's going to trigger the hormones that will make you eat more. So this action will cause us to overeat as we get fatter, instead of the other way around, eating less as we get thinner. So if we have too much LPL, we're going to overeat. So remember, these two, the HSL will cancel out the LPL and vice versa. And insulin was the key to whether we use these and how we use them, right? So let's talk about insulin for a minute. Now, insulin, maybe some of these other ones you haven't heard or are not familiar with, but insulin is one that's talked about so much. I'm sure that you think blood sugar when I say insulin. It actually has so many more jobs than that and affects so many things, like most hormones. I call insulin the hall monitor. So it's produced in the pancreas by beta cells. It's secreted in small amounts all throughout the day, but in large amounts in response to food. Especially so after a meal, it will be the highest. Remember, this means if you're snacking all day that you're triggering insulin all the time, okay? So insulin directs traffic in the blood by moving sugars in and out of the fat cells as needed. And it will trigger the sugar that's circulating in your blood to go into the fat cells or to be converted into glycogen and stored in our muscles. If we're calling it the hall monitor, then let's call these cells our classrooms, and it can be stored in fat cells or protein cells, and insulin's going to tell it where to go. When our blood sugar is elevated, we can get ourselves into trouble. And to put this in a frame for you, we really can only handle in our body 1 teaspoon of sugar circulating at any one time. How often do you eat more than 1 teaspoon of sugar? Pretty much always, right? So any more than that 1 teaspoon is causing damage. It's oxidative damage. It's ripping us to shreds. It is bad news for our body, so it has to be dealt with. So our body has to either burn it immediately or convert it to glycogen and store it, and it stores in our muscles, or it can be locked up in fat cells for a long time. So really, we can only store about 400 calories in our livers and 1,400 calories in our muscles. So to do the math, that's 1,800 calories. That's about 1 day's allowance of calories that we can store in our body, and anything above that is going into our fat stores. Insulin is busy trying to get sugar out of our bloodstream, and it's trying to move it into these glycogen classrooms, to the protein classrooms, but the protein classrooms like, no, we're full. We can't take anymore. We can only store 1,400 calories and we're full. So there's nowhere else to go. The liver is full. We got to put it into fat stores, okay? Well, let's say these fat classrooms are filling up fast, okay? And they look like a Utah classroom, overcrowded as usual, and they're signaling, no, you got to put it somewhere else. So insulin is pumping out more and more and more, and it starts screaming at your body, no, you've got to put this away, you've got to do this. Well, what do you do with a bossy nag? You start to tune them out, okay? And that's what your body does. It becomes less sensitive to the signals that insulin's giving, and this is called insulin resistance. So now we're pumping out more and more insulin, trying to move all the sugar out of our body. Meanwhile, if we're not able to, it's causing damage. And our insulin becomes chronically elevated because even though we need it, we're not listening to it anymore. We're pumping out more of it and we're not reacting to it anymore. The classrooms are full. The fat and the proteins are like, we're full, we can't take it. And that's where we get blood sugar dysregulation. Chronically elevated insulin due to insulin resistance is highly inflammatory, and it causes problems all over the body. But if it's left too long and not regulated, it becomes type 2 diabetes. So remember that insulin will signal for LPL and HSL, and it will determine the action of cortisol. All these hormones that we've talked about already take orders from insulin. It's really a bossy hall monitor, or they stop listening to it when they're overwhelmed. So insulin sensitivity really is everything. So how do we balance insulin? The more sensitized we become to it, we can hear its signals and we can act immediately on what it's telling us to do, okay? The more sensitive we get to that, the more successful we'll be in lowering inflammation in our body and regulating our weight and so regulating energy levels. So many benefits come from balancing our insulin. So how do we do that? Well, we avoid or we drastically minimize sugar. The average everyday American is eating way too much sugar. And then we reduce refined and starchy carbs, which our body processes the same as sugar, okay? So we reduce those kinds of carbs, like the tastiest kind of carbs, right? Now I'm just thinking about all the yummy refined and starchy carbs I'd love to eat right now. We eat more satiating macros like proteins and fats, healthy proteins and fats. And then exercising regularly, not to the point that we're triggering a cortisol response and contributing to chronic elevation, but exercise enough that you're moving daily and you're getting stronger and more flexible and you're keeping things moving, okay? Then another trick you can do is intermittent fasting, which we could do a whole video about that. Maybe we should, because it's a powerful tool for regulating blood sugar, increasing insulin sensitivity, and balancing a lot of these hormones we've been talking about. So experiment with a longer time between meals. So if you've been told to eat all these small meals and snack in between to keep you from getting super hungry, you're actually just triggering a chronic insulin response. You're making sure that that insulin will always be circulating in your bloodstream. Whereas if you stretch that window and have a longer time, so maybe you don't eat after dinner and then you don't eat till breakfast, so you went from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. without eating. That's a 12-hour window where no food was in your body. That's time for insulin to clear out and fat is allowed to burn, okay? Because you can't burn fat in the presence of insulin. You just can't. It locks it away. It shoves the door shut on those classrooms and it won't let it out. So play with your eating windows and try to reduce snacks. If you can't go very long without eating, you get hypoglycemic, you get really ornery, that's a sign of this insulin problem that we're talking about, of insulin resistance. So it might be a slow process, but really you're going to work on stretching those windows. And eating more satiating foods will help you, and cutting out the refined carbs will help you. We really have more control than we think we do. It can feel helpless and overwhelming when you're in that that roller coaster, but you can get off that. So type 2 diabetes is entirely preventable. It's a lifestyle disease, and any disease caused by food can be fixed by food. I hope that makes sense. It sounds too simple to be true, but it works. Okay, the last one that we're going to talk about, and we're just going to touch on it, is estrogen. So estrogen is in men and women. It's definitely predominant in women, but we both deal with this, and it will affect your weight loss in both men and women. So it's made mostly in our ovaries, but for also some in our adrenals, especially after menopause. When our ovaries shut down, it switches to our adrenals, and in men, it's entirely in our adrenals. And estrogen, high estrogen and low estrogen can both cause us to gain. It's really important to have just the right amount of estrogen. But in this modern society, a lot of us are estrogen dominant. It's just so easy to do. And estrogen dominance, if you're carrying extra weight, you're probably estrogen dominant. But what causes that can be exposures. We make estrogen in our body, but we also consume it and we're exposed to it. And exogenous estrogens, which are made outside of our body, affect our body the same way. They have a powerful effect too, so we need to limit those so that our body can regulate itself. But how can it if we're pummeling it with exogenous estrogens? So that comes as, I don't know how to say this word, xenoestrogens, estrogen mimicking compounds that come in our food when we eat fake chemicals and things that are going to throw us off. It's found in conventional dairy. The hormone balance is off in those cows that are fed horrible foods in horrible conditions and given antibiotics and hormones and all these things, and it comes out in the products that we're eating. So conventional dairy will mess with your hormones. Pesticides, which is all over our food and in our drinking water, and another incentive to eat organic and to wash our food really well. It's in our cosmetics. We're literally rubbing estrogens into our skin with a lot of the cosmetics that we use. It's in plastics, which are everywhere. We're even consuming microplastics that are found in the water more and more now, or in the fish that we're eating. So it's almost unavoidable. But so do everything you can to cut down exposures and eat whole foods. So estrogen impairs our blood sugar control because it has an effect on insulin. It suppresses thyroid function. It increases fat storage. That's what it's designed to do. So if you're another reason to look at your hormones is if you have signs of estrogen dominance, that would make it really hard to lose weight, and you would want to balance that either with natural measures or maybe even like supplementing with a bioidentical or a progesterone cream. Progesterone is the hormone that counteracts estrogen. So that's something to look at. And estrogen is a big, complicated one. We could do a whole video about that, so maybe we will in the future. But there's another hormone to be aware of. So how do we balance our hormones for weight loss and for health? And we've talked a little bit about this with each one, but many of these methods overlap. And so let's just talk in general for a minute. So avoid foods that cause dips and spikes in our insulin. So sugary foods, concentrated energies, refined foods that don't have the fiber or the protein to slow down absorption, processed foods, just cut those out. Avoid artificial colors, fillers, flavors, preservatives, and other chemical additives. Most of them are not tested. No matter what you think the FDA does for us, it can only test like less than 5% of all the chemicals that are allowed. And chemicals in food are often assumed safe until proven otherwise. And there are so many new chemicals on the market every day, not just in our food, but in pesticides and the way we raise our food. For some reason, they think that the chemicals we put on our food don't affect our food and we can eat them. But if you have to wear a toxic spray suit to put it on our food, we probably shouldn't be ingesting it, right? Even in micro doses, it will accumulate in our tissues and cause issues. So try to avoid these chemicals altogether. Eat clean, whole food. We've said this before, but real food, whole food, speaks the language of our DNA. Our body knows what to do with it, where to put it, and there's not all these fake hormones and chemicals that are disrupting the messages that we need and getting in the way of our health. Okay, include healthy fats and ethically sourced protein with every meal. And hey, if you're local, come to Utah Natural Meat where we can talk one-on-one with you in the store and show you exactly the best we have to offer in ethically sourced food. I'm actually really proud to work at this store. I'd probably have to be vegetarian if I didn't, because they've made it easy for people along the Wasatch Front to get clean, ethically raised food. So shout out to Utah Natural Meat. Exercise and move regularly. So like I said, you don't want to trigger a chronic stress response, but you do need to move all the time, and your body will adjust to that. So then once you're used to being more active, you can add more activity on that slowly and build to where you have even an extreme fitness regimen. It's just about pacing yourself and building up to it and allowing your body to adjust and then to thrive and embrace it. So meditate, we talked about a little bit, but really find what works for you, find what relaxes you and fulfills you and makes you feel rested. And then sleep. If you're not sleeping enough, if you're not getting at least 7 hours, and honestly, if you've been sleep deprived for years, it might take more. You might need 9 hours, you might need 10 hours until you get rejuvenated. It's just like when you're malnourished, it can take more nutrition and your body will soak it up and say thank you. If you've been sleep deprived, it can take extra sleep over a long period of time for your body to heal and settle back down at a more reasonable number. I know I did that to myself. I worked a lot when I had young kids, and I worked at night when they were sleeping. I'd be on my computer, and I thought I was great because I was getting so much done and functioning on 3 hours of sleep a night, but it's cumulative and you're doing damage and the bill will come due. So don't cheat yourself on sleep. And then finally, eat often enough, but not too often. And that's kind of an intuitive process. You have to listen to yourself. You have to relearn what leptin and ghrelin feel like and sound like. You have to read your body's cues, because maybe you don't need 3 meals a day. Or maybe you do, but you don't need the snacks in between. So listen to your body and give it time to balance so that it can communicate effectively with you. Anyway, that was a lot. That was a big information bomb. So like I said, this is going to be on the blog so you can read along and you can follow this information. But remember, it's not about guilt and shame. If you're not able to lose weight that you desperately want off, don't resort to appetite suppressants and diuretics for water weight and punishing methods to try to cheat the weight off. You need to work with your biology to make it happen if you want it to happen in a sustainable way. That means weight will come off slow and steady. You have to have patience and you have to work with your hormones, not try to cheat them or hack your way around them. So knowing about them is the first step of getting a strategy in place. So if you need more help than this, I'm trying to give you enough information that if you were really motivated, you could work on yourself and come out the other side just glowing, right? But if you need a little extra help, give me a call. So Utah Natural Wellness is my business name, but you can find me at nourishwithkristin.com, where you can go and even set up a free 20-minute consultation and look at my packages for coaching, and we can work on a diet strategy for you that will work with your goals and your lifestyle and focus on the specific issues that you're having and ways we can balance these hormones and other factors in your life. So yeah, give me a call if I can be of service. And otherwise, I wish you health and wellness, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another hot topic. Jump on to Facebook or Instagram and let me know what you want to hear about. And we'll do a video around topics that you're struggling with or you just want to know more of. That would just make my day. So thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you later.